A linguistics professor tested Maid's daughter in Japanese. The room froze. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into the story. It was a chilly autumn afternoon when Professor Jameson, a renowned linguist known for his arrogance, walked into his office, completely unaware that his life was about to be turned upside down. The walls of his office were lined with countless volumes of linguistic books and dusty papers. The rich smell of old leather from the chair in the corner mixed with the faint scent of freshly brewed coffee. He was the kind of professor who didn't think twice about belittling anyone he deemed less intelligent, and his arrogance was as legendary as his expertise. He sat at his large wooden desk, a symbol of his power in the academic world. He had always thought that his knowledge made him untouchable, invincible. But little did he know, today would change that. In the corner of the room, sitting quietly at a small desk, was Maria, the daughter of his maid, who had been cleaning the office for months. Maria, a shy and quiet 15-year-old girl, was often overlooked by everyone in the room. She wore a simple dress, and her hair was tied up in a plain ponytail. She had always been treated as invisible. No one noticed her. No one cared. As she sat there, quietly doing her homework, Professor Jameson glanced at her and smirked. "You," he said, pointing a finger at her. "I have a challenge for you. If you can translate this complex Japanese text, I will give you $100. But I'm sure you'll fail." The class chuckled at the professor's challenge. It was a common joke, made even more amusing by the fact that Maria was just the maid's daughter. How could she possibly understand Japanese? The text he had placed before her was a passage from an ancient Japanese manuscript, filled with difficult kanji characters that even seasoned linguists had trouble deciphering. Maria glanced at the paper, her eyes scanning the intricate symbols. The class continued to laugh, thinking this would be another moment for them to mock her. But Maria, quietly and calmly, began to read the text aloud in perfect Japanese, her pronunciation flawless, her understanding deep. The room fell silent. The laughter died down. Even Professor Jameson, who had been so confident in his superiority, could not hide the shock on his face. He had underestimated her. The other students, too, were stunned. Maria, the girl they had ignored and mocked, was not only fluent in Japanese, but her translation was more accurate than anything they had seen in years. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. What had just happened? The professor, now stunned and humiliated, stared at Maria. He had never thought that the maid's daughter could possess such hidden brilliance. This was no longer a joke. This was a moment of reckoning. Maria, still calm, looked at him. There was no pride in her eyes, no smirk, just quiet dignity. She had nothing to prove to anyone, but her ability had spoken for itself. The professor's ego had been shattered, and for the first time in his life, he realized that knowledge could come from the most unexpected places. The silence in the room was deafening as Maria finished her flawless translation. Professor Jameson stood frozen in shock, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The students who had once snickered at her, who had made jokes about her lack of education, now looked at her with a mix of disbelief and admiration. Maria, however, didn't seem to notice. She simply returned to her homework, unfazed by the stunned looks around her. She had done what no one thought she could do, but to her, it wasn't a big deal. She wasn't interested in the praise. She wasn't interested in proving anyone wrong. She was simply doing what she knew. It was in this quiet moment that Professor Jameson realized something that shook him to his core. Maria was no ordinary girl. She had just demonstrated an intelligence that surpassed that of any of his students. His pride, once as towering as his academic achievements, crumbled. What did this mean for his reputation? What did it mean for the pedestal he had placed himself upon? The professor cleared his throat, his voice now soft and filled with uncertainty. "Maria, I must apologize," he said, struggling to find the words. "I underestimated you, and I see now that I was wrong to do so." Maria looked up at him, her eyes calm but piercing. She nodded slightly, acknowledging his apology without any emotion. She didn't need his apology. She wasn't interested in playing the game of superiority. "It's okay," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't know?" Her response caught him off guard. There was no bitterness, no anger, just a quiet acceptance of the fact that he had been wrong. The professor was about to speak again when a student, who had been watching the entire scene unfold, stood up. "Wait," the student said, a note of curiosity in his voice. "How is it possible that you know Japanese so well? You're the maid's daughter. How did you even learn it?" Maria turned to face him, her expression still unreadable. She paused for a moment before answering, her voice calm but firm. "I learned it on my own. My mother taught me to read when I was young, and I just never stopped learning. I read a lot of books, and I listened to people speak. It's not that complicated." The room was stunned into silence once more. The other students had assumed that Maria's ability was some sort of fluke, but her explanation was simple and profound. She hadn't had the advantages that most of them had. She hadn't had access to tutors or expensive private schools. She had learned from books and from her own determination. It was a humbling realization for everyone in the room, especially for the professor. He had spent his entire career surrounded by intellectuals, surrounded by people who were rich with knowledge. And yet here was a young girl, someone he had looked down upon, who had surpassed all of them without the privileges they had taken for granted. Professor Jameson sat down, his face pale, his mind racing. He had just learned a valuable lesson. Intelligence was not defined by your background, your wealth, or your status. It was defined by your ability to learn, to grow, and to persevere. Maria, still focused on her homework, didn't seem to notice the shift in the room. She didn't care about the lesson that had just been taught. She didn't care about impressing anyone. She simply went about her business, quietly and determinedly. The professor, however, couldn't shake the feeling that his entire world had been turned upside down. He had spent so long thinking that he was the smartest person in the room, that no one could surpass him. But in that moment, he understood the truth. It wasn't about being the smartest person in the room. It was about being open to learning from anyone, regardless of who they were or where they came from. As Maria continued to work, the professor couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration and respect for her. She had shown him something that no degree or prestigious title could ever teach him. The next few days were filled with an unspoken tension that lingered in the air. Professor Jameson couldn't shake the image of Maria's calm and confident expression as she translated the Japanese text with ease. It was as though the weight of the world had shifted, and he was left standing at the center, questioning everything he had believed about intellect and success. He had spent so many years climbing the ladder of academia, surrounded by prestigious degrees, awards, and titles. He had prided himself on his expertise, his ability to outthink and outsmart anyone in the room. But now, here was this young girl, from a family that had nothing, proving him wrong with nothing more than her quiet intelligence and determination. Meanwhile, Maria continued with her life, unaffected by the storm she had caused in the professor's world. She still sat in the same corner of the room, her face buried in her books, her homework, as if nothing had changed. She was a creature of habit, dedicated to her studies and committed to helping her mother with the chores around the house. Her life was simple, but in its simplicity, she had mastered the art of learning and understanding the world around her. One afternoon, Professor Jameson could no longer bear the weight of his thoughts. He decided to visit Maria at her home, hoping to learn more about her and the quiet brilliance she possessed. It was a small, modest apartment tucked away in the corner of the city, far from the luxury and extravagance of his own world. When he knocked on the door, it was Maria who opened it. She looked at him curiously, but there was no sign of surprise or resentment. She simply stepped aside and allowed him to enter. The apartment was small, but it was cozy. The smell of freshly cooked food filled the air, and the faint sound of a television playing in the background gave the place a sense of warmth. It was a stark contrast to the cold, sterile offices and lecture halls he was used to. Maria's mother, a kind woman with tired eyes and rough hands, greeted him politely, but with a touch of wariness. She had never been one to engage with the world of academia or the wealthy elite. She had always worked hard to support her daughter, but she knew better than to dream of anything beyond their small, humble life. As they sat down at the kitchen table, Professor Jameson couldn't help but feel out of place. He was used to grand dining rooms and fine meals, not the simple, hearty food that Maria's mother had prepared. He found himself uncomfortably aware of how out of touch he was with the world he had just stepped into. Maria sat quietly at the table, her posture as composed as ever. She listened intently as the professor spoke, asking her questions about her life, her education, and how she had come to learn Japanese. But instead of talking about tutors or expensive schools, Maria simply explained that she had learned on her own, reading books from the local library and listening to native speakers. She had a gift for languages, one that she had cultivated in the quiet moments of her life. Professor Jameson was astonished. How could a girl with so little access to resources know so much? It was a question that haunted him. As the conversation went on, the professor began to realize that Maria's intelligence wasn't just a product of her knowledge. It was a result of her perspective, her ability to see the world from a different angle. She didn't rely on the same methods or systems that he did, but that didn't make her any less brilliant. It simply meant that she had found her own way to learn and grow. When he left that day, Professor Jameson felt changed. He had come seeking answers, but he had found something much more valuable. Maria's quiet brilliance had opened his eyes to the world beyond his own narrow view of success. And for the first time in years, he felt a deep sense of humility. He had been wrong about so many things. He had assumed that intelligence was something that could be measured by degrees and titles, by wealth and status. But Maria had shown him that true intelligence was about the ability to learn, to adapt, and to persevere, no matter the circumstances. That night, as he lay in bed, Professor Jameson reflected on everything he had learned from Maria. His thoughts drifted to the lesson she had taught him. Intelligence was not just about knowledge, it was about perspective. And it was in that moment that he realized he had underestimated not only Maria, but the power of learning from the unexpected. The following week, Professor Jameson couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. His mind constantly returned to Maria, to the way she had answered his questions with such calm confidence. He had always believed that those with wealth and education held the keys to success. But Maria had shown him that the path to brilliance wasn't determined by what you were born into. It was determined by how much you were willing to learn, regardless of the obstacles in your way. He had learned more in those few hours at her home than he had in years of lecturing in the ivory towers of academia. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that Maria's story wasn't unique. There were countless others like her, quietly brilliant but overlooked, dismissed because of where they came from or the work they did. People like Maria didn't often get the recognition they deserved, but that didn't mean they weren't deserving of it. A week later, Professor Jameson stood before his class, preparing to introduce the next lesson. His usual air of authority had softened, replaced with a newfound humility. As the students filed into the lecture hall, he felt a strange sense of uncertainty. He wasn't used to feeling this way, but Maria's impact on him had been profound. As he began to speak, he glanced around at the students, and something inside him clicked. For the first time in years, he realized that the purpose of his lectures wasn't just to showcase his intellect. It was to inspire others to think for themselves, to question the assumptions that had been drilled into them. He turned to the board and began writing. The lesson today would be different. It would be about the power of perspective. As he explained the concept of language and how it shapes the way we view the world, his thoughts kept drifting back to Maria. He realized that she had embodied the very idea he was teaching. She had learned to see the world through her own eyes, not through the lens of societal expectations or the limitations that others had placed on her. Maria had carved out her own path, and in doing so, she had achieved something far greater than any degree or title could offer. After class, Professor Jameson made a decision. He would invite Maria to speak to his class. It wasn't something he would normally do, but he felt that her story was one that needed to be heard. The students needed to hear it. They needed to understand that intelligence wasn't confined to those with the most resources, the most prestigious degrees, or the most expensive tutors. It was about perseverance, curiosity, and the willingness to learn, no matter the circumstances. A few days later, Maria stood in front of the class, just as she had stood before the professor in his office. Only now, she was no longer a quiet girl in the corner. She was a voice of truth, a voice of inspiration. As she spoke about her journey, how she had taught herself Japanese, how she had fought to gain knowledge despite the odds, her words resonated with the students. They listened intently, their previous doubts about her intelligence now completely erased. They saw the brilliance she had possessed all along, and they realized that anyone could achieve greatness if they were willing to put in the effort. When Maria finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't the usual polite clapping that followed a guest lecture. This was genuine, heartfelt applause, a recognition of her talent, her perseverance, and her courage. As she left the classroom that day, Professor Jameson couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. He had come to realize that true brilliance wasn't about what you had, but about what you were willing to learn and share with the world. Maria had reminded him of that, and he was forever changed because of it. In the days that followed, the changes in Professor Jameson were noticeable to everyone around him. He walked the halls of the university with a different air about him, no longer the smug academic who had all the answers. There was a quiet humility in his step, a recognition that he didn't know everything, and that learning could come from the most unexpected places. The impact Maria had on him had shifted not only his views on education, but also on life itself. It wasn't just about knowledge anymore. It was about understanding, empathy, and recognizing potential, no matter where it came from. Maria had opened his eyes to the fact that intelligence wasn't bound by wealth or status. The professor couldn't help but reflect on how he had viewed his own students before. He had always thought that the smartest ones were those with the best grades, the ones who followed the traditional path of education. He realized now how wrong he had been. Maria hadn't followed that path, but she had surpassed his expectations by simply having the drive and the curiosity to learn on her own. One afternoon, as Professor Jameson sat at his desk, he found himself pondering the idea of success. What made someone successful? Was it their accomplishments, their degrees, or their ability to navigate the world of academia? He realized that success, for him, had always been about outward achievements, publications, awards, recognition. But Maria had shown him a different kind of success. It wasn't the accolades that mattered to her. It was the knowledge she gained and how she applied it in her life. She had created her own path, with nothing but determination and a thirst for knowledge. The professor knew that Maria's story wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. He had seen something in her that no one else had noticed before, an incredible potential waiting to be nurtured. After much thought, he made a decision. He would offer Maria a scholarship to attend the university, a place where she could continue her studies and explore the world of languages even further. It wasn't much, but it was the best way he knew to support her. He wasn't doing it out of guilt or to right a wrong, but because he truly believed in her. The next day, he visited her home again. Maria was sitting at the kitchen table, just as she had been the first time he came. Her mother was preparing dinner in the background, the familiar, comforting smell of home-cooked food filling the air. Maria looked up as he entered, her face calm and expectant, as though she had known this visit was coming. Without any formalities, Professor Jameson sat down across from her. "Maria," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I want to offer you a scholarship to study here at the university. You have a gift, and I believe you deserve the opportunity to nurture it." Maria's expression didn't change. She simply nodded, as though this was something she had already expected. It wasn't surprise, but acceptance. She had always known her worth. Her mother, however, looked at the professor with cautious eyes. She wasn't sure what to make of this offer from a man who had once looked down on them. She had always kept her head down, working hard to support her daughter without expecting anything in return. But now, here was a man, the very man who had once mocked them, offering her daughter a chance. She couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions, skepticism, hope, and gratitude. Maria turned to her mother and smiled gently. "I'll think about it," she said quietly, before looking back at the professor. Professor Jameson, seeing the wariness in the mother's eyes, added, "You don't have to decide right away. I just wanted to offer you the chance if you want it." Maria's mother nodded, still processing what was happening. She had always taught her daughter to stand on her own 2 feet, to never expect handouts, and to always keep moving forward. But this was different. Maria had earned this. Professor Jameson left the apartment that day with a sense of fulfillment. He knew that he couldn't change the past, but he could help shape the future. And in that moment, he realized that he wasn't just changing Maria's life. She was changing his too. The days that followed were filled with a sense of anticipation, but also uncertainty. Maria had taken some time to think about the scholarship offer from Professor Jameson. It wasn't an easy decision for her. She had always been content with her life, studying on her own, helping her mother, and not seeking recognition. The idea of leaving everything behind to enter the world of academia, with all its expectations and pressures, felt foreign to her. It was a world she had never imagined being a part of. But as she sat in her small room, the weight of the decision before her, Maria realized something. She had never sought out validation or approval, but perhaps this scholarship wasn't just about her. It was about showing her mother that there was more to life than just surviving, that there was room for something bigger than they had ever dreamed. After thinking it over, Maria made her decision. She would accept the scholarship. She didn't know exactly where this path would take her, but she knew it would be a step towards something greater. When she told her mother, there was a moment of silence. Her mother looked at her with a mixture of pride and concern. She had never imagined her daughter would be offered such an opportunity, and though she was proud, she worried about what it would mean for their life. Maria's mother had always worked hard, keeping her head down, doing her best to provide for them. But this was something different. This was a chance that could change everything. "Are you sure, Maria?" her mother asked, her voice full of hesitation. "It's a big step, and I don't want you to feel overwhelmed." Maria smiled softly. "I've thought about it, Mom. I think it's time to see what else is out there." With her mother's reluctant blessing, Maria accepted the scholarship. The very next day, she returned to the university, where Professor Jameson was waiting for her. He greeted her with a warmth that hadn't been there before, a recognition of the strength it took for her to make this decision. He wasn't just offering her a chance to study. He was offering her a place where she could grow, where her talents could be nurtured and her potential fully realized. As the days turned into weeks, Maria began to immerse herself in her studies. She found herself in a new world, a world filled with intellectuals, high expectations, and opportunities she had never dreamed of. The professors and students around her were impressive, and for the first time, Maria felt like she truly belonged. Her mind opened up to new ideas and concepts, and she found herself thriving in the environment that had once felt so intimidating. It wasn't easy, though. The pressure was immense, and there were moments when Maria doubted herself. She was still the girl from the small apartment, the girl who had learned everything on her own, who had been underestimated by so many. There were moments when she felt like an imposter, unsure if she truly deserved to be there. But each time those doubts crept in, she remembered the journey she had taken to get here. She had proven herself to be more than capable. She had earned her place. And with each passing day, Maria grew stronger. Her professors, including Professor Jameson, began to see the depth of her intelligence. They were amazed at the way she could tackle complex problems with ease, how her unique perspective often brought new insights into class discussions. No longer just the quiet girl in the corner, Maria's voice began to be heard. She was not only excelling academically, but also becoming a leader in her own right, helping others who struggled the way she once had. The transformation wasn't just in her grades or her intellectual achievements. It was in the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence that had once been hidden beneath the surface. Maria had found her place in the world, and with it, she had found herself. It wasn't the world of wealth and prestige she had once thought she wanted, but it was a world where she could truly be herself, where her talents and abilities were valued for what they were, not for where she came from. Professor Jameson watched this transformation with pride. He had seen Maria grow from the quiet girl in the corner to someone who was taking the world by storm. He realized, with a sense of awe, that Maria had taught him just as much as he had taught her. Her story wasn't just about overcoming the odds. It was about finding strength in the most unlikely places, about embracing your own path even when the world tries to push you onto another. And as Maria stood on the threshold of her future, ready to take on whatever came next, Professor Jameson knew that she would go on to accomplish great things. He had no doubt that Maria's journey was far from over, and that the world would soon see the incredible potential she had always held within her. As the semester continued, Maria found herself becoming more and more comfortable in her new life at the university. She no longer felt like an outsider in a world she didn't understand. Instead, she was thriving, growing into her potential with every passing day. Her confidence continued to grow, not just in the classroom, but but in the way she carried herself in the world outside it. She had made friends, students who were just as eager to learn as she was, and they admired her not only for her intellect, but also for her humility and determination. They saw her as a source of inspiration, a living testament to the idea that greatness isn't determined by the circumstances of your birth, but by the strength of your will. Professor Jameson watched this transformation with a sense of pride, but also a feeling of awe. He had witnessed firsthand the quiet genius that Maria possessed, but now he saw her becoming someone truly remarkable. She was no longer just the maid's daughter who had impressed him with her knowledge of Japanese. She was becoming a leader, someone who inspired others to think beyond the confines of their own limitations. One afternoon, during a particularly intense class discussion, Maria stood up and shared an idea that took everyone by surprise. Her words were simple, but they were profound. We often think of knowledge as something that is given to us, something that we receive from others. But the truth is, knowledge is something we create within ourselves. It's not about being told what to think. It's about learning how to think for ourselves, how to question and explore the world around us. The class fell silent, and for a moment, all eyes were on her. Professor Jameson, who had taught some of the brightest minds in the world, felt a profound sense of respect for her. She had just articulated a truth that so many others overlooked. It was a truth that was not about memorizing facts or formulas, but about the power of curiosity and independent thought. After that day, Maria's reputation spread beyond the confines of her class. More and more professors began to take notice of her, not just for her academic achievements, but for the way she was changing the atmosphere at the university. She was challenging assumptions, encouraging others to think critically, and inspiring them to reach higher. But despite the recognition she was receiving, Maria remained humble. She never sought the spotlight, never sought praise. She was simply doing what she had always done, learning, growing, and helping others along the way. Maria's success wasn't just measured by the grades she received or the scholarships she earned. It was measured by the way she touched the lives of those around her. She had shown them that brilliance wasn't about where you came from or how much money you had. It was about the choices you made, the work you put in, and the way you treated others. As the months passed, Maria continued to excel in her studies, and her influence at the university grew. She was invited to speak at conferences, share her ideas with scholars, and even collaborate on research projects. Yet, even with all the recognition, she never lost sight of who she was or where she came from. One day, as she was walking across campus, she spotted Professor Jameson sitting on a bench, deep in thought. She walked over to him, her footsteps light on the pavement. "Professor," she said, her voice soft but confident, "I've been thinking about something." He looked up at her, his expression warm. "What's that, Maria?" "I've realized that the journey I've been on wasn't just about me. It's about everyone who has been overlooked, underestimated. It's about showing them that they don't have to settle for what others think they are capable of. They can create their own path, just like I did." Professor Jameson smiled, the pride he felt for her evident in his eyes. "You've learned the most important lesson, Maria," he said. "True success isn't about what you achieve for yourself. It's about what you inspire others to achieve." Maria smiled back, the weight of his words settling deep within her. She had always known that her journey wasn't just her own. It was a journey meant to inspire others, to show them that no matter where you start, you can always rise. And with that realization, Maria knew that her path had only just begun. Months passed, and Maria's presence at the university grew more prominent. Her name became synonymous with determination, intelligence, and humility. She continued to break barriers, not just in her studies, but in the way she interacted with others. Professor Jameson, who had once been her mentor, had now become one of her biggest supporters. He had seen her transform. From the quiet, humble girl in his office to a confident young woman who was becoming a force to be reckoned with. Her research in linguistics was groundbreaking, and her lectures were filled with students eager to learn from someone who had proven that knowledge was not bound by circumstances. One day, Maria was invited to speak at a major academic conference. It was an event that attracted scholars from all over the world, and the thought of standing before such a distinguished crowd was both thrilling and intimidating. But Maria, as always, remained composed. She knew that this was not just an opportunity for her to showcase her knowledge. It was an opportunity to inspire others. The day of the conference, Maria stood backstage, her heart racing slightly as she prepared to take the stage. The audience would expect brilliance, but what they didn't know was that Maria had something even more valuable to offer. As she walked to the podium, she felt the weight of all the moments that had led her here, the long hours of studying, the nights spent helping her mother, and the many people who had doubted her along the way. She knew her journey had been one of perseverance, and it was a message she wanted to share with the world. The room fell silent as Maria began to speak. Her voice was steady, her words deliberate. She didn't start with a complex theory or a complicated analysis. Instead, she began with a simple truth. I didn't come from a family of scholars. I didn't have a tutor or a mentor pushing me to achieve. I had to learn on my own, and that's what made me who I am today. As she spoke, Maria could see the faces in the audience shift. The skepticism and doubt that had once followed her were now replaced with respect. People were listening, truly listening, to what she had to say. She spoke about the power of self-education, of the importance of curiosity and perseverance, and how every setback was an opportunity to grow. By the time she finished, there wasn't a single person in the room who hadn't been moved by her words. The applause was thunderous, and Maria felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. It wasn't about the accolades or the recognition. It was about knowing that her story had touched others. After the conference, Maria found herself in a quiet conversation with one of the event's organizers. Maria, the organizer said, "You are one of the most inspiring speakers we've ever had. You've proven that intelligence doesn't come from what you're given, but from what you're willing to create for yourself." Maria smiled, feeling the weight of the journey that had brought her here. "Thank you," she replied. "But it's not just about me. It's about everyone who's been overlooked, everyone who's been told they can't. I want them to know that they can." As the months continued, Maria's journey became a beacon of hope for those who had once been told they didn't belong. She continued to excel academically, but more importantly, she became a mentor to others, showing them that their potential wasn't limited by their background or circumstances. Professor Jameson, now her colleague and friend, watched in awe as Maria carved her own path. He had seen her rise from a quiet, underestimated girl to a leader in her field. She had taught him more than any of his lectures ever could, and he was proud to call her a peer. But for Maria, this was just the beginning. She knew that her journey was far from over. There were still obstacles to overcome, still lessons to learn, and still people to inspire. But she also knew that as long as she stayed true to herself, there was no limit to what she could achieve. And so, Maria continued her path, unwavering and determined, a reminder that brilliance is not defined by where you start, but by the choices you make along the way. As the years passed, Maria's journey continued to unfold in ways she had never imagined. She had not only earned a place at the university, but had earned the respect and admiration of everyone around her. Her influence extended beyond the classroom, and soon, she was invited to speak at prestigious academic conferences across the country. Each time she spoke, her message was the same. It's not about where you come from, but the choices you make that define your path. She shared her story with anyone who would listen, always emphasizing the importance of self-belief and determination. Her words resonated with students, teachers, and professionals alike, and slowly, Maria became a symbol of resilience and hope. She never forgot her roots. Every success she achieved was a reminder of the small apartment, the long hours studying with her mother, and the quiet moments when she doubted her own potential. She knew that none of it would have been possible without the support of her mother, who had always encouraged her to pursue her dreams, even when the world seemed to offer her nothing. Maria's mother, now older but still as hard-working as ever, watched with pride as her daughter continued to excel. She had always known that Maria was destined for greatness, but seeing it unfold before her eyes filled her with a sense of awe. One evening, as they sat together in their small living room, Maria looked at her mother and said, "I never could have done this without you, Mom. You taught me how to keep going when everything seemed impossible. You showed me that strength doesn't come from the things we own, but from what we carry inside." Her mother smiled, her eyes filled with love and pride. "You've always had that strength, Maria. I just helped you find it." Maria's success didn't just stop at academics. She had become a mentor to countless others, especially those who had faced the same challenges she had. She often held workshops, encouraging young people to pursue their dreams, no matter their background. Her story was proof that anyone could overcome adversity and make a difference in the world. One day, while walking through the university campus, Maria was approached by a student who had been following her journey. "You've inspired me to keep going," the student said. "You've shown me that it's not about where I come from. It's about where I'm going." Maria smiled, a sense of fulfillment washing over her. She had always hoped her story would inspire others, but hearing it directly from someone meant more than anything. It was proof that her journey had not only changed her own life, but had touched the lives of others in ways she never imagined. As Maria stood there, in the very place where she had once felt like an outsider, she realized that her journey was far from over. The lessons she had learned, the struggles she had faced, and the triumph she had experienced had all shaped her into the person she was today. But she knew that her story was not just about her success. It was about showing others that they too could rise above their circumstances and achieve greatness. And as she walked away from the student, she knew that the future was filled with limitless possibilities. Maria had proven to herself and the world that no matter where you come from, no matter the challenges you face, you have the power to create your own destiny. And with that, she continued to walk forward, determined to make a difference, one step at a time. Discover the inspiring journey of an unlikely hero in this touching story that echoes the best millionaire stories. A young girl, underestimated by many due to her humble background, rises to become a symbol of resilience and intelligence. This story is one of those millionaire stories that prove success isn't defined by where you come from, but by your dedication, curiosity, and unwavering determination to overcome obstacles. Maria, a girl from a modest family, proves that brilliance is not limited by status, and her journey reveals how anyone, no matter their circumstances, can make a lasting impact. Like many millionaire stories, this tale is about more than just financial success. It's about personal growth, learning, and inspiring others along the way. As Maria continues to defy expectations and carve her own path, her story resonates with those who need a reminder that greatness comes from within. This story is one of the most moving millionaire stories that will make you rethink the true meaning of success. Join Maria on her transformative journey and witness how one individual's perseverance can change the lives of many, just like the millionaire stories that inspire us all.